Penguin Random House Canada Audio presents The Measure of My Powers, a memoir of food, misery, and Paris, by Kai Ellis, read for you by the author. Preface. When I was first asked to write a memoir, I declined immediately. I was scared, though I was not afraid to recount my experiences in a Parisian pastry school, or of the opening of Beaucoup Bakery and Café, the Paris tours, or even of how I became a writer. Over coffee, interviews, speeches, and articles, I shared these stories proudly. I could easily tell the happier, abbreviated versions of my memories, the ones with easy endings, because I assumed no one would be interested in the others. I was concerned about making others feel awkward if I was more candid. These struggles were painful to live, and I presumed they were just as uncomfortable to hear. Sometimes seeing another's vulnerability accentuates our own. Truthfully, I was worried about what others might think of me. I wanted so desperately to be special, but I imagined they would see my flaws and weaknesses and think I was unremarkable. And at the time, sometimes even now, a childish part of me was afraid of being judged. So instead, I offered an excuse. My story is not yet done. But deep down inside, I knew I wanted to write it. And in reality, our stories are rarely finished anyway. I spent years skipping over the painful parts until I realized that in those moments when I was telling my story, it was I who wasn't ready to remember these harder moments in such detail. I had carefully put those darker memories away in a sturdy box and placed it in the back of a closet. It was a way to protect myself from the immense hurt that, at one time, I was drowning in day after day. And I tried to forget these stories existed, ignoring them for as long as I could, tiptoeing around them, careful not to kick up their terrible dust. After a few years passed, some of the hurt had healed, and I felt strong enough to peek inside the box again. I looked at the painful parts and grew to appreciate that my strength was found in the moments when I felt weakest, and that they were both beautifully and crucially intertwined. I began to understand that by refusing to write this memoir, I was only trying to avoid vulnerability. That was frankly not a good enough reason for me. So, knowing I was braver than my fears, I began to write, and when I did, I naturally thought of MFK Fisher. As I reread her books, I found myself once again in the pains and joys of her narratives. I was drawn again into her stories of Sunday picnics by swimming holes, eating peach pie with her silent father, of pre-war France, warming segments of clementine on radiators while watching soldiers soldier on the streets below her bedroom window. I found myself laughing, amused by her sharp sense of humor. She titled one of her chapters, "Pity the Blind and Palate." I was taken by the way she placed modest words beside one another to create images, tastes, and smells so whole that I could have sworn the memories were my own. When I first read her stories, those many years ago during the emptiest time in my life, Fisher's work led me page by page into her world, and the stories were my connection to the living. They held on to me like a thick rope tight around my wrist as I hovered in the depths of depression. They pulled me to food, into the kitchen to bake, cook, console, feed, feast, and connect back to who I was. It was then, in that hungry and confused place, that I read this quote from George Santayana. "To be happy, you must have taken the measure of your powers, tasted the fruits of your passion, and learned your place in the world." And when I began this book, less hungry, having tasted passions and discovered places in the world where I felt at home, I reread this same quote and knew these words were also mine. MFK Fisher's book, The Gastronomical Me, titles 11 of its 26 chapters The Measure of My Powers, and I chose that as the title of my book as an ode to her and how her words have fed me. And like many of hers, my book is a collection of memories. I've written them as vignettes, short or long stories strung together with food. They are at times playful, at others painful, and like memories, they are sometimes seemingly unrelated and random. Though this is just the way we remember, while doing something mundane, like brushing our teeth or during our commute, non-sequential memories surface, at times taking us by surprise. But the memories we do keep form who we are when all put together like a puzzle, regardless of how unimportant and vague each one seems alone. It was through writing that I was placed again in the depths of those moments I had tried so hard to forget. I found some parts flowed easily, but at other points I was obstinate, refusing to move until I gave myself the space to remember, to let go, to forgive others and myself before I could tell the story with any amount of clarity and grace. And with each chapter, I celebrated again my triumphs, relived my passions, and said goodbye once more. Slowly, word by word, my story and I were made whole again. In the end, I found that writing this book was more helpful to me than it could ever be to anyone else. Even so, I share my stories as honestly as I remember them, in the hopes that someone might read it on a day when it might be particularly helpful. Or that perhaps those who recognize my darkest moments may also find themselves in my triumphs and be fed until their hungers are satisfied. A note on the names and conversations in this book. I purposely chose not to share names, using only a single letter instead for many people in this book, particularly for my former husband, G. The reason is that this story is mine and not theirs. The conversations and details are as accurate as I remember them, but as we all know, memories evolve and grow as we do. Blue turns teal, and I know that for my entire future, I will only see richer facets of the past. Chocolate Chip Cookie, 2007. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Lao Tzu. These were the two moments in my day I dreaded. No, I think feared is a better word. Most. The moment just before sleep and the precise moment I woke up. The unnerving silence of those times. There were no busy sounds to distract me and nothing to occupy my mind. They were the moments I would be forced to face my own tangled and disfigured mind, even though I wanted desperately to look away. At night, I would lie awake sometimes until the dark sky lightened into paler shades of dawn. My insides crawled and vibrated, panic hijacking hours that, for others, were filled with easy rest. Even when I did find sleep, usually on the couch with the artificial noises of late-night TV lulling me, it was never for very long. In the morning, my chest would clench and yearn for unconsciousness. I kept my eyes closed and my body still, like a corpse, in hopes that my fragile sleep wouldn't leave me completely. I tried to remember the last lingering image, any residue of a dream, wanting it to pull me back for another moment or two. But I was always out of luck and would quickly realize the effort was in vain. I hadn't dreamt in months. In the past, my dreams had been wild and vivid, full of colors, conversations, places, the feel of fabric between my fingertips, or even the faces of people I had long forgotten. I would dream of a friend's hazel eyes speckled with rust, or of the fine hairs at the back of their neck that formed a V. But these dreams had stopped, and so had sleep, with restlessness replacing both almost entirely. I was abandoned and forced to be alive for another day, so I would relent and slowly open my eyes to my dark, damp bedroom. Inhale, exhale. I can do this. Just get through today. And then after today, I paused to imagine what came next. There was only a repeating image of a lifeless routine that made me feel nauseated. Tomorrow it starts all over again. Dread filled me. I closed my eyes again, sinking into myself, wishing I could cry, but mostly that ability had abandoned me too. I have to do this over and over, again and again and again, I thought to myself. G sprawled to my left, the sheets humid from his sweat, covering me like a
Sample complete. Ready to continue?